We're live. Booyah. How's everybody doing? We needed, I forget what day of the week it is. I genuinely forget what day of the week it is. I have to look at my phone, go to my calendar. It's Thursday. It was either Wednesday or Thursday. We needed to get a midweek stream this week because I've got questions and I know of a few lawyers who I can ask these questions to. One of which is Robert Barnes. And incidentally, Nate Brody might be popping in to this stream. I'm just looking in the bottom to see if I see his face. Okay, intro stuff. We are in slow chat mode, but I've only put it at 25 seconds, which I think is reasonable, so it avoids spamming and whatever. Super chats, same preface as always. If you're going to be angry, if you give a super chat and I don't get to it, don't do it. I don't like the pressure and I don't like people feeling bad. I'm going to bring up all of them. If I miss some, I apologize in advance. I will. It's like I say, it's a good problem to have, but it's a problem and I don't want people feeling bad or feeling used or exploited. It makes me feel bad when people feel that way, but we've gotten to the point. We've got over 1,200 people watching. We've gotten to the point where I can't get to them. And I don't want to do that threshold thing like, well, we'll only address chats over a certain amount. That feels very, dirty. So if you're going to feel bad, don't do it. Or you're going to get angry, don't give a super chat. Bear in mind, YouTube takes 30%. That might offend some people, and that is a justifiable sentiment as well. Okay, what else is there? That's it. It's going to be probably a hard 90 minutes or 89 minutes. We got kids upstairs and they're not going to cooperate for that long, but we're going to do 90 minutes, maybe a little more if we push the limits and kids don't come down driving us crazy. On the menu tonight, okay, I guess we're at some point going to have to talk about the presidential debates, even though there's nothing really law about it, but it's like the elephant in the room. But we are going to talk about the incident that has been born from that presidential debate, which is Joe Biden's tweet about Kyle Rittenhouse. And I've got questions. I mean, we're going to discuss this because there are legal implications to that. Now, apparently, Kyle's attorneys have announced that they're going to sue Joe Biden for defamation and the Biden campaign for defamation. On paper, it looks exactly like the Elizabeth Warren Covington kids, maybe on steroids. But I say that in the sense that it looks like that, and I suspect the outcome would be the same if there hasn't already been the precedent set in the Elizabeth Warren case, sovereign immunity. We've seen the Court of Appeal decision on this channel. So we're going to talk about that. And we might do that one first because I don't like talking about the, touchier subjects if the kids ever come down. We're going to talk about the Trump New York Times tax story because people were asking good questions as to whether or not it's obviously legal what the New York Times did, or rather I should say not illegal, not sanctionable in virtue of the Pentagon Papers lawsuit, New York Times versus the US, vice versa. We're going to touch on that. We're going to touch on some mail-in ballot stuff. What was the third thing we were going to talk about tonight? Let me just go to I see Nate's texted. He says 2 minutes. I see Robert Barnes is in and looking good. I'm going to tease everybody with that. The third subject of the evening. Put that on pause. Sullivan. Oh, Sullivan update, of course. I forgot. It feels like just yesterday that I put the video up that I put up 3 hours ago. The Sullivan hearing. Kids aren't here. That was a poo-poo fest. That was to go from that to the debates. You got to be a glutton for punishment to do that. All right, let's see. We got Enter Sandman, NBC, CBS, etc. Dismissals denied. Very good news. And we'll get to one other off-topic question. But if Trump wins the presidential election, John V., who does Mr. Barnes think Trump will pick for Attorney General if Barr retires? Well, perfect segue to Marcus Cato says, thank you for the coverage on these important topics. It's my pleasure. I mean, I love it because I get to learn a lot. And I think I'm going to learn more tonight because I think I might have made a mistake. Maybe. We'll see. In the New York Times. Robert, how you doing?
Good.
Are you on mute?
I don't think so. But can you hear me?
Nothing yet? We're going to wait for
no, I'm not on mute.
Maybe you can hear me, correct?
Oh yeah.
We're going to hear a lot of boomer comments in the comment section. Check to see if your audio is enabled. You do not seem to be on mute. Maybe unplug your
When I checked the mic, it said it was good coming into the StreamYard.
Can't hear anything. Oh, you can hear him?
Yeah.
Let me see if I'm not the idiot here. Robert, try it again.
Check, 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 check.
It's Robert's fault. Sorry, guys. I didn't have the volume on my computer. Well, that's embarrassing. Apparently, I'm not reading the chat. That is so embarrassing. I'm actually now sweating in my shirt. Robert, how you doing?
Good, good.
Okay, so Nate Brody's going to pop in, and it's going to add to the discussion. Well, let's see. First of all, if we go with the standard intro questions, any news on any of the files we have discussed previously that you are entitled or allowed or authorized by law to share?
Nothing. I settled a big case today, but not one of the cases we've discussed. So, but it was gonna take up the next 2 weeks of my time. It was a very complicated tax case, and got it resolved, which was very, very pleasing. So I'll have to treat myself in some manner, but I haven't figured out how yet.
That's fantastic. Well, there's no better treatment than 2 weeks of liberated time, to the extent that you can actually use it where you are.
If for folks that don't know, tax court sucks. You never get a jury trial on whether or not you owe the government money. I think it's a scam in my view, but you don't get you have to go to a court that's a specialized court called tax court, where specialized judges are assigned. And to give you an example of how uphill a battle someone has against the IRS wins over 85% of the time in tax court. And realize that for a case to even get all the way to tax court means it should be an above average case for someone to win, because anything else is either settled or resolved or something else. So for it to get to that stage means that it should be a 50-50 proposition at a minimum, just what random statistics would produce. So when you see 85-86% outcomes, then you know you're up against it. The tax court judges see the IRS all the time, not people fighting the IRS on a regular. What I mean by that is the IRS lawyers are before them all the time. So the IRS lawyers know them and they know the IRS. And the best way to keep your job as a tax court judge and to not upset people is to be on the IRS's side, because they're the repeat actors. It's called the repeat actor problem because it shows up in arbitrations and mediations and things of that nature too, that the people who are there the most often, the most frequent, have an institutional edge. And so you combine it, you're up against it. In this case involved, involved facts from 20 years ago. It involved all kinds of density and complexity. So it was going to be a mini nightmare, and you're often arguing with a judge about things that the judge is not used to hearing. I always bring novel arguments to the equation, but you have huge hurdles to overcome in essence. So you're a fighting underdog up against the 6 wolves who want to devour your client. So it's always good when you get a good resolution.
85% conviction is almost as bad as the federal prosecutor's statistics. I saw Nate in there, but I think he disappeared. But he's going to come back in a second. Robert, until Nate gets in, let's start with Kyle Rittenhouse, because I mean, it seems analogous to the Elizabeth Warren. For anybody who doesn't know brief detail of the facts, during the debate, we all saw, what's been running in the headlines for the last 2 days about Trump not denouncing, Trump not denouncing for the umpteenth time, whatever, an answer that obviously could have been better by anyone's account. But it's, these questions are sort of, there's never a good enough answer to the question. But setting that aside, Biden the next day, and I swear to you, I thought it was a joke. I'm going to bring Nate in at the same time. I thought the tweet was a joke. Oh, Nate, put yourself on mute there. It's a little bit of a, there you go. Nope. Whose background noise is that? There you go. I thought the tweet was I thought it was a fake tweet. And I don't retweet these things anyhow, but I thought it was a fake tweet. It was basically describing Rittenhouse as a murderous white nationalist without mincing words. And we heard yesterday or today that his attorneys, I think is it Pierce or is it L. Linwood? Who said they're going to sue for defamation now?
I think, someone who's associated with Linwood talked about it at first, and then I guess it wouldn't surprise me, though I don't know who they're going to sue precisely. My view was, I'll get to the legal capability to actually win such a suit, but my view was, if I were representing Rittenhouse, I would sue Chris Wallace first and foremost, and then secondly, sue Joe Biden, because Chris Wallace used his debate platform to clearly, by innuendo, say that that Rittenhouse was involved in racist violence in Kenosha. Now, there's hurdles to overcome without question because he didn't use Rittenhouse's name. But it was clear but you could at least argue that a lot of people inferred from Chris Wallace's statement that Rittenhouse was involved in white supremacist militia violence in Kenosha. And the reason for folks out there, there's sometimes you sue even when you know you're up against it legally. Sometimes you do so because you want to make new law. Sometimes you do so because you want to get public attention to the legal issue so that you can get legislative change to occur. I did that in the case of suing the Senator Warren and Congresswoman Haaland, wanting to achieve one of the two. And the third time you sue is just to send a message. When I was representing Alex Jones, we sued a couple of people and threatened to sue a bunch of other people to back them off of a lie that they were spreading about Jones. The media did. The media quickly quieted up and quelled their noise. When I went public saying I was going to sue a bunch of people in the Covington case, 90% of the big names all backed off, retracted, and didn't repeat it. So part of the reason would be to get ahead of that narrative and put pressure on the other side, even if you don't think you'll survive a motion to dismiss. I think he can sue in places that does not have an anti-SLAPP statute so that they don't have a risk of fees coming back the other way. But I would start off with Chris Wallace because it was really outrageous what Wallace did. I mean, Wallace was spreading fake news the entire debate. It was one hoax after the next hoax. It's like there's plenty of places you can go at Trump without going into hoax world. But he went into every single hoax he possibly could. He disgraced himself on a national stage, and I would sue him because he's a disgrace of a journalist. He's what his dad was at the end when his dad was selling out for big tobacco. For everybody who doesn't remember, they buried an insider story because Mike Wallace, who, by the way, grew up selling tobacco on late night interview shows, sold out and pimped himself out for big tobacco. And his kid is a chip off the old block, only in the corruption side, not the IQ side. So I would just be brutal in going after him for that reason alone. The going after Biden campaign is going to be a much bigger reach than, in my view, and for other reasons. Even though he shows Rittenhouse's image.
Hold on a second, guys. Robert, I think some people are saying the feed died. Did the feed die? I think I'm going to see what happens here. Feed is still good. Okay, no, people are still seeing it. Sorry.
Yeah, feed is good. Feed is good.
But Robert, bringing it back one step. So I hadn't thought about the Chris Wallace angle. And just as a general thing, I'm more inclined to forgive Chris Wallace because I think as the moderator, he's not there to be the real-time fact checker. And I think it's easy to blast him. But setting that aside, we'll get to the suing Chris Wallace and what that would entail. My understanding is they're going to sue Biden and the Biden campaign. Sovereign immunity, we've seen it in Elizabeth Warren. Presumably it's the exact same argument as with the Covington Catholic kids, the exact same rationale, tweeting about a current event, etc. Would the sovereign immunity, am I stupid for even asking, it would not apply to the campaign itself?
It wouldn't apply to Biden either. He's not an elected office holder. So they wouldn't have that immunity at all. The reason I'm focusing on Chris Wallace out of the gate is because it'd be one thing if Chris Wallace failed to fact check Biden doing that. But that isn't what he did. He introduced this. He interjected it. He created it. I was wondering where he was going when he started talking about violence. And then when he said violence, white supremacist violence in Kenosha, it was like, there was no white supremacist violence in Kenosha unless you're accusing Rittenhouse. By the way, he shot other white people. Okay. I mean, all of it's absurd. It was to slander a 17-year-old kid facing life in prison in a high-profile trial shows what a bottom gutter level bum Chris Wallace is. So that's why I would sue him. The Biden doing something political, not a real shocker, frankly. He put Rittenhouse's image on there, but he doesn't even, it's more innuendo. In other words, it's not even as direct as what Wallace said. Wallace says white supremacist violence in Kenosha. Do you condemn it? That can only refer, frankly, to one person. So you'd be arguing about whether or not it was a oven concerning him. But if we use the Alex Jones standards the liberals want, by golly, he can be sued. Because they have a very broad definition of oven concerning, but even a more limited definition, there's a fair argument that millions of Americans interpreted that statement as referring to him. Clearly, Joe Biden thought so. That's why he showed the photo the next day.
But Robert, I have to admit though, that's a really, really. I'm talking about you're stretching it to as far as the defamation. I think the edges of defamation can go because obviously without you're going to be asking, and it's the pick of a judge, either a liberal judge or conservative judge, to infer that he was talking about this one individual, even though he's made. And I agree, you're right. Kenosha, he could have only been, in my mind, talking about Kyle, but I don't know if that's enough to actually be able to recover off that. You know what I mean? I understand your point about the swing, but.
No question, that's the very big legal hurdle that you're not likely to get past. Same problem with the Biden campaign. Even though they show the photo of him, they don't specifically say white supremacist him. They use that right before they show the photo of him. So it's going to be tougher. It's actually tougher to show. It's easier at one level. They have a photo of him. It's harder at another level. They're less specific about what they're using the photo for. So in both cases, the of and concerning part, for people who don't know, it's called colloquially, which is that basically you have to show that the statement was about you. Now, I would note in the Alex Jones cases, they said no, that no longer applied. If someone could infer it was about them, or if you could further do Google research and discover it might be about them, that was the standard the Texas Court of Appeals applied, the standard that's never been applied in the history of defamation law. Now, I disagree with that standard, but if that's going to be the new standard, well, let's apply it to everybody then. It's what I've told some of my institutional friends in the media who hate Alex Jones. Say, if the Alex Jones standards applies to you, you're all getting sued tomorrow. Good luck with that. But yes, Nate is right. The other concerning part would make it very hard to get past a motion to dismiss to sue either party. And
so let's assume, or let's just take for granted you get past that point. Taking Corliss Drinker's super chat here. If Rittenhouse if he's ultimately convicted of murder, wouldn't that moot the issue of defamation, since defamation suit could drag on for years? I say, if he's found guilty of the act, could that moot the defamatory aspect of what was said?
No, because they said the motivation was white supremacist violence. That's the difference. If he just said he was a murderer, that's one thing. But to say the murder is hard to sue because of the prosecution, because there is probable cause, they can always cite that. But though it was the white supremacist motivation part. Now, a second aspect of this, by the way, for everybody out there, it's almost impossible to sue for calling someone a racist or white supremacist or white nationalist. It's why the media does it. I challenged that in the Cassandra Fairbanks case. And while they dismissed it on actual malice grounds, because the Trump judge decided to look up facts from the internet, because apparently that was a reliable source for him. That's another story. But putting that aside, he did acknowledge that I was able to get him go a little further and say that certain kinds of white supremacist references could in fact be defamatory. My view is we have hate crimes these days. We have racial discrimination laws on the books. People decide people's motivations as a matter of fact all the time. And so that there's some line there between just an opinion that's so vague it's not really a factual determination and a factual determination. The question is whether you get past a motion to dismiss. I'll tell you, 90% chance you don't. So you have to get past of and concerning, and then you have to say that white supremacist or white nationalist or any language like that is a statement of fact subject to verification rather than a statement of opinion that's too vague to be determined. The famous case William F. Buckley sued many years ago, went up in New York. They said calling him a racist, anti-Semitic, all the rest was not actionable. So it's very hard to sue for that. Now, of course, Lynn Wood is out predicting he's going to bankrupt everybody, but that's Lynn Wood.
I was about to say, if Kyle is convicted, the one thing about defamation, especially here in New York, is about if you're convicted of murder or you're some type of advent criminal and someone defames you, right? There's nothing you can recover from because you have no reputation to protect. So so that's one of the issues here with defamation, is that if you just have such a horrible reputation, then I can almost say anything about you because it's not going to harm your reputation, because that's the piece of it. So I think in Rittenhouse case, if he is convicted, which I don't think any sane jury, or I don't believe he should be convicted at all. I think that was self-defense. If you just look at the facts as they are, I think the media is trying to make him look like some type of left-wing mass murderer out there, which that's not what happened. Only you have to do, if for those of you who don't know what happened, just go look at an actual news report of what actually happened, and then you can see this kid wasn't out there shooting protesters at mass. That's not what happened. But if he is convicted of murder, I think it would be extremely hard for him to recover a defamation suit, because what reputation does he have to maintain? What damages are we going to get? Unless you're talking about maybe defamation per se, which then you don't have to worry about the damages piece, right? But if you're talking about calling him a white supremacist, you got the opinion piece, and he has no reputation to maintain. Well, it's just I don't think there's a recovery there for him.
also the legal qualification, killing someone, there could be a legal justification versus murder. I think it would be with homicide. There would be no,
Yes.
legal justification is in the term. So if he did in fact kill someone, it's different than being a murderer if it's found to be in self-defense versus an actual murder. But now this actually brings us to the major question. Someone was pointing out in the chat that I'm an idiot because Joe Biden does not benefit from sovereign immunity, nor would the campaign. I don't know. I was just taking for granted he would. Can you sue for damages? I don't know, some sort of violation of your ability now, or tainting the jury pool. I mean, putting out a tweet like that, effectively makes it, if not impossible, virtually impossible, one would think, to get a fair trial. Now that you have the vice president and potential, presidential candidate tweeting a fact that is going to taint everything.
That's probably a net plus for him, because now he'll get more real meaningful jury selection, which is the hard part in a trial like this. So he can cite to that very effectively. He can cite to Chris Wallace and cite to Joe Biden as why he needs extensive, expansive, probing what they would voir dire, the Latin phrase.
Voir dire, yes.
Voir dire, yes. You're much better at it than me.
But if you're in Texas, they say voir dire. Like it seems so weird in Texas. I don't know why.
Well,
don't get me started.
In Georgia, Lafayette is Lafayette. So it's all a little bit different, depending on where you are. The town of Whitwell is Wool. So it's all where you're from. But so I think that wouldn't necessarily be damages of a certain kind. So what Nate's talking about is that you get to a certain place that your character is considered so bad that you could never prove special damages as a matter of law. You could call it the Lenny Dykstra rule. My former client, that was just found against Lenny, that he had damaged his reputation so bad that he can't sue for defamation. Generally, though, it usually has to be real extreme and can be a jury question, depending on the nature of the facts. But yeah, that's a third problem for him, is the nature of the case. But the real reason to sue here is to stop the media from lying about the kid. That's the real reason to sue. You're not likely going to get past a motion to dismiss, avoid an anti-SLAPP jurisdiction so you don't owe a bunch of fees. You're not likely to get damages. It would likely be stayed pending the criminal case anyway. You don't necessarily want him testifying under oath about his reputation and have free scale of discovery. Your goal wouldn't be to win a big verdict. Your goal would be stop lying, everybody. It was the reason that I made the very aggressive statements for the Covington kids right out of the gate was, if everybody retracts in 48 hours, the reason to do that was just to get everybody to stop lying and then to ideally get some degree of correction on the record. We were able to achieve both because your average person doesn't know how to assess a lawsuit. Even Biden and other people won't necessarily know how to assess a lawsuit. They'll reconsider what they're doing. And even on the Democratic side, there's other targets they can go after than a 17-year-old kid they don't understand. So I get they like the visual of him with a gun. They think that has all these dark intonations, the scary, frightening impressions. It's like the Willie Horton of the left. It's kind of impression there. The militia's coming. It's why they like the Proud Boy visual imagery. Though the Proud Boys, by the way, were founded by a Hispanic and have African-American members and interracial.
The leader's of Cuban descent. I think he's Cuban or Cuban descent. I mean, these are discussions you have with people where people deny that Trump knows who the Proud Boys are. I think 90% of the people don't know who the Proud Boys are, in the sense that you may not like them and they may have issues, but some accusations are more accurate or less accurate than others.
But you know what?
It's a total smear on the Proud Boys, by the way. It's a total smear. But can they sue? No, because there's too many of them in America. If you have more than 50 people who are defamed, that's why I say the magic thing. If you want to lie about people, make sure you lie about at least 50 of them.
The aggregate group. When me and Viva first met, that's what we talked about. You can't defame it, the aggregate group. It's always about the individual. But one thing though, is that I will say this: the media has helped the Proud Boys the most. Because I didn't know who they were.
Well, the biggest promotion of ever.
Yeah, and now I'm listening to them in the presidential debate. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say with Trump, Trump's reaction. He's dealt with this. Wallace. Here's my other problem with Wallace. He asked that exact same question in the March 2016 Republican primary debates. So he knows what the answer is. It was a dishonest, misrepresentative question, and he decided to smear a kid in the middle of it, smear the Proud Boys in the middle of it. Knows he can mostly get away with it. That's why I'd be for suing him, and I'd be for documenting everything bad about him and his entire history, and I'd put it in the lawsuit so that everybody else could report on it with immunity, because when you report on a lawsuit, you're immune. folks. That's one of the reasons why some people file lawsuits, is to get certain facts in the public record. I'm not saying I did that years ago against Haim Saban, but it sure was unfortunate, the things they ended up reporting about that poor guy.
No, Robert, no.
I know. I mean, it was just, hey, I had to raise it in court, and they repeated it. It turns out there were some serious accusations about that.
Can I collect? I just want to correct the record with two pieces. Number one, it was Joe Biden who brought up the Proud Boys. Remember, he had asked him to denounce white supremacists, and Joe Biden was like and he was like, who? And Joe Biden was like, the Proud Boys, the Proud Boys. So Joe Biden was the one who threw the Proud Boys name up in the mix to give them that promotion. But second, I just got to be fair. That wasn't easy. Like, how easy was that question? Yeah, of course, I denounce all white supremacists. I think Trump was trying to fight against two people at that stage. You're fighting against the moderator, and you're fighting against, because you have two people talking to you at one time. He's screaming Proud Boys, he's screaming white supremacists, and Trump is like, I don't know who the Proud Boys are, but this white supremacist thing I got to answer. And then he just said, well, whatever, and just got to move to his next point.
He said, sure. And this is the thing that I said in a tweet, one of the undumb things. I said, like, when you're asked a question repeatedly, one of two things happens. You either get agitated or you get complacent. And it's sort of like in a deposition, that's why you have a lawyer to object, question asked and answered, move on. They do it. It's done for a reason. In this response, he got clearly, he says sure. And when he says sure in his mind, it encompasses all of the other times he categorically denied it, whatever. And so he thinks that that's good enough on the moment, when clearly it's not, because there are people who are probably hearing it for the first time.
Well, the second component of that is it's a version of, there's a tendency these days in cancel culture to constantly demand you answer these questions. And Trump has an instinctual response when he's live to refuse to do so, because he sees it as a trap, unless he knows where it's going or what it's coming from. And so it's like asking, okay, have you stopped beating your wife? Well, when did you stop beating your wife? And imagine asking that question every single day and saying, and that's what Trump's press secretary was agitated about today. She was like, how many times does he have to answer? Are we supposed to come out and give an answer every day, every debate, every question, every time?
And incidentally, in the first live stream that I did with Mike Cernovich, and I started getting, I won't say hate mail, but concern mail, saying, hey, why would you do a live stream with this guy? And I look into what's going on and what the accusations are and things he said in the past. And we spent, for me, it's the first time that I'm asking him the question. For him, everyone's been asking it, demanding an apology for the last 5-10 years, and it gets tiresome. And he explained it to me. He's like, I met you, Dave. You look nice and you seem nice. I've been doing this. I answer this question all the time. It's never enough. Whenever anybody asks it, I wasn't doing it for bad faith. Whenever they ask it, it's a trick question. They just want to catch you on something, and it gets tired. And I remember him saying it gets tired or it gets old. If
Trump had been prepared, he would have done an easy transition. He'd have said, I absolutely condemn all racism, and that's why I wouldn't allow critical race theory to be taught, because unlike what you said, Chris, it teaches racism, it teaches anti-Americanism, and we're not doing that in America. That would have been if he'd been prepped with lines. Now, Trump takes a trade-off. He chooses to be less polished, which has a consequence of not having prepared lines, in exchange for coming across as more authentic. Yeah. It's a trade-off he's made all the way back to 2015. But could he? Yeah, it's because he wasn't prepped for it. But I just found Chris Wallace disingenuous the whole time. And when he went to Rittenhouse by innuendo, that was just the last straw for me. I was like, that is the most unacceptable. You're a mediator. You can attack these guys all you want. You don't need to throw a 17-year-old kid under the bus. Anybody that has had Chris Wallace lie about you, you can reach out to me, because I'm looking for lawsuits.
I do have to say, at some point, like even with clients who are going on the stand, you prep and you say, well, certain questions are coming, right? It's just like if you got somebody who's like, I had a guy charged with assault, they're going to ask you, did you hit the guy, right? They're going to ask that question. And I'm assuming Trump knows that this question is going, it's been asked with every debate he's been on, right? Every debate he's been on, they've asked him about this white nationalist thing. So to not have a canned answer, it kind of was like, okay, I understand maybe that's why I think maybe it was because he was talking to two people. It's hard to debate two people at one time. It's very hard to do. I think that was more of the issue, because I just can't understand why he wouldn't just knock that up. Of course, that's what I don't support. And I think what Viva's saying is true. I think the short thing. I think he said sure. I think he thought that was the answer, but now everybody says it's not enough. And I think that's what. But I want to be fair. I don't think Trump is by any means is a racist, right? I don't think by any means he's a racist. But I think by him not answering the question definitively in that setting, it gives the left that talking point. And Joe Biden is throwing out Proud Boys, and nobody knows who's the Proud Boys are. Right now, when he says Proud Boys, everybody who thought Proud Boys thought they were a white supremacist racist group. I don't know anything about the Proud Boys. I haven't looked. That's the only thing I've heard is what they said last night. And most people probably in this chat only heard that last night until you guys gave us the facts now. And I think that's something that, if you are the moderator, he was supposed to step in at that point and say, no, we're not talking about the Proud Boys because we don't even know if this guy knows who the Proud Boys are. We're just talking about white supremacy. That's where I think the conversation went awry.
No, there's no question. It's like someone said to me, and I think it was actually Cernovich. She said every tweet is basically a new tweet. You're tweeting to for the first time to the audience, and so when you're on the biggest stage of the presidential debates, and that question is asked, there's a lot of people who are hearing it for the first time, and you better have an answer that will satisfy as though it's the first time they've heard the question and the answer. And it was. I don't think anyone's gonna say it was a great answer. The question, the issue is. I as a joke, I go screenshot every YouTube video where over the last 4 years, where the headline is Trump denounces white nationalism. Trump's down, and I said, I was like, okay, at some point you get irritated with it, but President, you shouldn't. You should have a home run answer, and you could have. I mean, I know what I would have said. Oh, is there one thing before?
No,
I know
absolutely not.
When anybody asks me, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say the other component, though, if I were Democrats, they keep running the 2016 script over and over again.
Yeah.
So this was the same thing in 2016. Like the vulnerability for Trump was the very first answer Biden gave, which was to make Barrett an issue about pre-existing conditions, what I'd been warning people was coming. And Republicans had been in la-la land about it, and Biden had a nice compact answer on it. He never came back and revisited it again. And the media, because they hate Trump so much, decided, hey, we're going to focus on the race. We'll figure out what can we do that makes Trump look bad. They needed to do something that made Biden look good. If I'm Biden's team, what I want after the first debate is something that makes Biden look good. I want that to be the 24-hour, 48-hour, 72-hour news cycle. Something that said, man, this guy really is presidential. This guy handles stress well. This guy is empathetic. This guy is ready to lead. This guy can take on Trump in a tiger cage and win. That's what I want to be talking about. But the media is so obsessed with Trump that they looked at, okay, what could be our news story that makes Trump look bad for 24, 48? Folks, the image of whatever you think about Trump is baked in the cake. That ain't changing much one way or the other. It's Biden who his own base is unenthused about. That's what they needed. I mean, young people tuned in at the lowest rate of any debate since 2000. He's got record low. That's why they're losing voter registration battles in almost every key swing state that has voter registration by party. That's why they're suddenly today, as the NBC News is reporting, suddenly discovered maybe they need a ground game. Maybe getting everybody to mail in the ballot voluntarily wasn't going to work when people don't care about the election. So that's my takeaway. Could Trump have answered it better? Absolutely. There's tons of those questions he had. He missed tons of home runs he could have.
Yeah, it was weird. I want to say he looked nervous, but he almost looked. I don't say juvenile. Those are like qualification, or those are judgmental terms. He just looked jittery and a little too hyper.
Well, what happened is about a third of the way through the debate, Wallace started interrupting him. If people would go back and look at it, Trump doesn't start the major interruptions. It's Wallace, and then it goes chaotic from there on out. The other thing that happened is Trump. I went back and watched the debate on mute, and there's a great panel called the Behavior Panel. Eric Hunley of the Unstructured podcast interviews.
Check them out, people.
Yes, they're great. Chase Hughes, Mark Bowden. Mark Bowden. One of the things he does is he goes around and prepares candidates around the world for debates. And he pointed out some great things going into this debate. And when I watched it on mute, it was more clear what was happening behaviorally. Trump, about a third of the way in, turned to just pure predator against Biden. Really didn't care about Wallace at all. And it was just to attack. And by his body language. And the three things that I look for in body language in a presidential debate is how do you handle conflict? How do you handle certain kinds of stress? And then third, are you a good liar? Now that third may sound morally bad or something, but the reality is the public historically has always preferred a guy who lies well in the White House. And the reason for that is, here's the analogy I give to remove the moral character side of it. Is think about if you or a loved one was in great danger and was going to die or suffer great harm, and you needed one of these two people to go in and successfully lie for you to save their life. Who would you pick? And when I've used that as one of my 3 main betting techniques for presidential elections ever since I was a kid. And almost even the people you think of as weak liars, they ran against weaker liars. So Poppy Bush was a weak liar, but Michael Do Kick My Ass was an even weaker liar. Jimmy Carter was a weak liar, but a lot better than Jerry Ford, who couldn't walk down a flight of stairs and put his head up when someone shot at him. When I was looking at body metrics, Biden was just disassembled body language wise.
It was actually
the debate.
It was actually impressive. I wanted to get to the one super chat from the beginning, and Nate, answer this one first and tell me what you think. I know what I think, but it doesn't matter. It was from just gonna fill the air. Terry Ebert Mendoza says, when you guys get around to it, please tell me if any of you saw a wire or something in Biden's arm. Thank you. Nate, have you got, I mean, there's a lot of people floating the idea that he was listening or hearing something. What do you think?
No.
It was a rosary bead. There's better photos of it.
Maybe
what they were saying was the very end of a rosary bead. That's what they thought was the wire.
Yeah, because don't get me wrong, but I think no matter what anyone says, no matter what Biden, I didn't expect Biden to do as well as he did, in the sense of I expected him to go out there. Oh, my name is Joe Jediah. Like he had been built, and the Trump campaign did such a fantastic job of building Joe Biden up to be incompetent, to be losing it, right? To lose all his marbles. So Joe Biden didn't have to go in there to win the debate. He just had to go in there to tie, because that's all. Because I think at a point it made Trump almost like, you can't beat this guy, the guy that can't remember certain facts. So that's where I think Joe Biden, he didn't have to win. It was the expectations against Joe Biden were so low that just coming out with just tying, or even just coming out barely losing, was a win for Joe Biden. And I think now going into the next debate, you have to now kind of figure that in, because if you destroy the opponent, he just comes out looking normal, then it makes it look like he won. You know what I'm saying? And the second part is, I haven't looked into the Proud Boys. A couple of people are asking me about the Proud Boys in the chat. I haven't looked into them. So I don't know if they're racist group or not. I'm just saying, I just don't trust the media. If the media is telling me they're a racist group, then I have to look into it to say, okay, I don't know, because the media told me this stuff about Breonna Taylor. They told me this stuff about Jacob Blake. They tell you a lot of stuff that's just factually incorrect. So I'd have to look into it. So I just don't know. Go ahead.
I pulled up the super chat earlier that someone said that the Proud Boys, and I think it was Jason L. He said Proud Boys don't start fights; they end fights. They describe, and it was another one who said they describe themselves as Western chauvinists. There's nothing racial in it; it's cultural. Whether or not that's going to make you feel any better. And Tim Pool has done a number of good reviews on them. Says, they're not racist. They don't start fights, but they definitely end fights. They don't, denounce violence when it's in the context of defense. And when they go to protests, if a fight breaks out, they don't not defend themselves.
Of course.
Whatever you want to think about them. It's here we go. Truman HW says, Proud Boys, Trump said, stand down and stand back. How is Biden and Kamala pro-law enforcement if bailing out rioters? Wallace protected Biden, re-Hunter. Oh, incidentally, if I can get to that other super chat, which was right here, the question about Biden, about Biden's son. Thoughts on how Biden responded to the Hunter Biden question? I thought he did a surprisingly good job, and I actually felt sympathetic towards him when he said he was proud of his son.
Yeah, I thought that answer did two things. It attached the emotional component to what's going on in the country today of the drug addiction and how families are struggling with this, and to see him struggle with this, it was a nice turning point, because let's just not be confused. That was prepared. Like, he knew where he was going to go with that. And I think by just admitting, a lot of times, especially with clients, you tell them, you can't hide from certain facts. So sometimes you can admit, but then pivot and go a different direction. And I think that's what he did. He's Hunter Biden, he's got this, he's stolen, he's done this, he's, Ukraine, but he was also, addicted to cocaine, and he overcame that. And I'm proud of him for that. And I think that touched a lot of people who've dealt with drug addiction. My mom dealt with drug addiction. I have family members who dealt with drug addiction. So for me, it touched home if you have that personal connection. You know what I mean? But I also think Trump, I understand where he was going with it, but I think the missed opportunity there was whenever you start bringing up people's families and kids and stuff like that, you have there's always the risk of making them into a more sympathetic figure. And I think that's what happened with that question.
Yeah, but it's an interesting thing. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Barnes. Robert, sorry.
Two things. One, I know a lot about the Proud Boys. I was there when they started. Proud Boys were started by Gavin McInnes, co-founder of Vice. The word hipster, and partially it was invented by Gavin McInnes. So sort of he became more populist conservative, you could say, after 9/11. So he was one of those people that converted after 9/11. Different people reacted different ways. He started Proud Boys as a drinking club. So it was just a drinking club. And then Antifa violence and anti-Trump violence started in really March 2016, full scale in Chicago, where they took over the convention hall there. And because of it, the Proud Boys are sort of your macho types. The Western chauvinist language comes from Gavin McInnes. He just means, proud and, all the rest. But there's no, anybody knows Gavin McInnes, there's no racial component at all. It's very much sort of like, he grew up in a culture where you defended yourself physically. So what happened was they initially started off as just a drinking club. Let's get together and be men. And it's okay to be men in America and in the West. And the West should defend its values in the Enlightenment, not be scared of them and not be afraid of them. So it's very much counter sort of what you could call the cultural left, is how it originated, how it arose, and then just sort of like a fraternal organization. It blended into a security operation when they were requested by speakers to defend them at speaking events because Antifa was escalating its violence at these events. I was at the Deplore Ball with Gavin McInnes when they were throwing batteries this big at your head when you tried to walk in during the inauguration convention. So that's where that started. I told him and told other people around him that that Antifa wants street violence, so they're going to try to provoke people to behave in a certain way toward them in the streets. They want someone to be a foil and to be careful and wary. And I think he was only people around him were only partially cognizant of how the media would portray them and what would happen if you defend yourself. Now we get to see legally. If you defend yourself, you get criminally prosecuted. That's Kyle Rittenhouse. That's the McCloskeys. What was happening today in the legal world was previewed then politically. And they got into, there were some Antifa people that went after Proud Boys in New York. The Proud Boys ended up defending themselves, getting into a fight. McInnes comes from a culture where a street fight's no problem. I call it Leonard Skinner culture, even though he's from Canada. But Leonard Skinner, their favorite thing to do after a concert was to go to a bar and get into a fight. It was part of Southern culture. So it's that subculture. People for whom gangs are no problem. Not gangs like dangerous gangs, but hey, let's brawl and see who's going to win. Not gangs in New York style, but it's lesser than that. And that's where it came from. They got pigeonholed early. They got prosecuted, in my view, wrongfully in New York, selectively prosecuted in New York. That created the image, and then that image got tattooed on them by the media. As a whole, there's not many Proud Boys left. Gavin McInnes stepped back from it a year and a half ago because of how they were being politically portrayed and perceived. And there were people who showed up that were within Proud Boys that may have whatever viewpoint. Because it became just, like I said, a loose fraternal organization that's less hierarchical and structured than Antifa is. And Antifa is designed to be a sleeper cell oriented in its structure, not to have a hierarchy. They learned from the tactics of bin Laden and the rest, who learned all that from the CIA, by the way.
A lot of people don't realize that bin Laden and all that learned from all that against Afghanistan and against the Russians. But let's not go there.
Do money laundering, how to do gun training, how to do camps of armed individuals, how to recruit, how to do politically staged events, how to have sleeper cell. All of that came from CIA.
And let's not forget about those American weapons.
Oh, of course. Look, that's part of the deal. You got to buy from the seller. So that's the nature of the animal.
Let me just bring this one up because, Nate, this is to your point earlier about Hunter Biden, and which is why I totally agree with Jason L. The issue with Hunter is not his drug addiction. It's the rest of life decisions, which you can try to attribute to the drug addiction, but not fighting to support a child, getting paid lots of money from foreign governments for arguable work. Jason L says Trump needed to articulate why Hunter is important, which is his father as VP enabled his son to get rich from foreign and adversary money. Trump failed at doing that, in my opinion. Hopefully next time. I mean that's what I think the issue is, and it is.
One thing I want to say about that is the reason why I always say families off issues is because if you look at my family, most of my family have been in jail for decades, years. Now, don't get me wrong, I've not helped them do anything that I can't. But you know what I mean? It's like I'm my own man, and I understand his son got all these issues, right? But when did it start being okay to say, here, son's a dirt bag, that means you're a dirt bag? I think you can attach it to say, okay, this is what happened, like the Ukraine stuff. How did he get this job? And you can attach it to him. Yes, I do get that. But really, I'm just not okay with saying that his son was this bad of a person. That just means he's that bad of a person, because we all fail. Some parents do fail at raising their children, and if you to call him a bad father, or to kind of insinuate that, I just think it goes too far. I think Joe Biden is so much that you can hit Joe Biden on. Just his kid, really, and maybe it's just me. Maybe maybe politics has just gotten that nasty nowadays. I just don't know.
A lot of people in the chat are pointing out it is, and it's my issue as well. It's not the drug addiction. Everybody has their foibles. It's Biden corruption, China and Russia. It's the political stuff that probably only occurred because his father was VP at the time. Not a question of being a good or bad father. It's a question of whether or not you're exploiting your position as VP to favor your family members, and then hurling the same accusations against your ideological political adversaries.
I have a contrarian take on all of that. The reason is I watch debates visually. I don't pay a lot of attention verbally. My view is that modern debates are mostly interpreted by your persuadable voter, persuading whether they'll vote or not, persuading who they'll vote for, that group, and by mostly visual cues, particularly in the first debate. And so that's the reason why I watch it mute and look at body language throughout. And then went back and watched it verbal to see why the body language was going the way it did. So I look for three, and to give people a legal analogy, so sort of a bridge, why are we discussing politics on a legal show? There's often overlap about methods of persuasion in the courtroom or the court of public opinion. In the Snipes case, they had a key witness that was potentially the most damaging witness. And the night before is when they had a preview for me when I got the witness list. I mean, it was a crazy trial that way. And they structured the witness list to be 3 people leading up to this guy. And I had already taken apart those 3 people with investigative work. The other side didn't know that. It was going to be perfectly set up for me. So by the time we got to the key witness, he was already going to be discredited in the jury's mind. Prosecutor Bobby O'Neill, one of the smartest, best, trained by the guy that the CTV show Law and Order is based on in New York, Robert Morgenthau, one of the best federal prosecutor I've ever gone up against. Old Irish guy, skilled, not old. I mean, just old school Irish guy. He figured that out that morning, and he flipped the script, and he had the most damaging witness go first. So my entire strategy was out. I was planning on preparing for him at lunch, fine tuning it. That was gone. I had to do it on the fly, and it became clear that if you just read the transcript, I scored 0 points against the guy. That this looked damning for Snipes. But if you were there in the trial, what I figured out about a third of the way through is I was not going to get an answer out of him that I needed, but that the guy was clearly an ass. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to ask a bunch of questions that make it clear to this jury that they're going to hate this guy. And that Tom Mesereau does this geniusly, did it in the Michael Jackson case. He understood facts didn't matter, emotions do. That's why The Reptile Brain is the most popular book for trial lawyers to read about what really motivates jurors. So and by the end of it, they hated him. They said later they totally despised him, that it was a mistake for the government to put him up early. And because I was able to get that out of that emotive quality out of him. So I look at the debates, and I think Trump's sole goal was to make Biden look bad under stress, to make him look not strong, to not be dominant. Trump has a broader view of that. He thinks whoever dominates wins, no matter what the situation is. And then third, I don't think he was doing this consciously, but to make Biden look like a bad liar, that when he's lying, you kind of know he is, or when he's trying to be deceptive or the rest. And if you look at the body language of the debate, I started watching it from the third of the debate forward, Biden just falls apart. I mean, it's the body language for Biden is awful. So I was like, what triggered all this? And then I realized why Trump was bringing up Hunter Biden. It was not to explain to people the corruption and whether Biden was funneling money through his son by leveraging his vice presidency office to get himself and his family rich. That's the technical issue. It's the reason why he was willing to go, as Nate points, so personal. Talk about the drugs, talk about getting kicked out of the military, et cetera. It's because Trump had figured out somewhere early on, probably, I mean, if you go watch it beforehand, watch how Biden responded to any Hunter question, that Biden just loses it. He loses his focus. He loses his concentration. That's when he starts like, shut up, man. He starts just getting irritable and agitated. He looks bad under stress. And what Trump is playing to, because he's been a salesman his whole life, is that people psychologically think if Biden can't handle Trump, how is he going to handle war? How is he going to handle bad foreign leaders? How is he going to handle a crisis? So while we're paying attention to what a bunch of sleazy attacks and look at how chaotic everything is, what Trump is paying attention to is what is being unconsciously processed, because, again, our debates now are very visual, not really verbal. Very few people just listen to the radio or podcast of a debate. They're picking up these cues of Biden's weak. Biden doesn't handle conflict well. Biden can't lie to save his life because he started doing the snake tongue. His eyes started, all that jazz. So I think that's why he did it. Trump was willing to take a lot of heat for being so personal and attacking Hunter because his goal was just he figured out it rattled Biden. Because he brought it up randomly. He would just randomly say, by the way, your son's corrupt. By the way, your son's corrupt. Why did Hunter take that? Hunter's so bad. I mean, it was brutal.
One thing I do want to say is that the point that you're making about the visual against, which actually said, people should go look at the books, the stories about the first televised presidential debate between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon won on the substance. Everybody after the debate believed Richard Nixon won that debate on substance. But Richard Nixon's lighting was bad, and he didn't wear makeup. John Kennedy did. So, in the court of public opinion, John Kennedy won the debate and went on to win the election. You remember that, Robert? And it was like a huge thing. So he's right. It's
Johnny took a little shot before he went.
but it was one of those pieces where it was the substance didn't matter. It was just the visuals. The fact that this guy looked presidential, this other guy didn't look it.
He looked confident. He looked cool. He looked crisp. Nixon looked like he was sweating and nervous and edgy. And the other thing is, Trump's trying to create an interpersonal dynamic. There's only two people I've been around personally. Now, Obama and W, by people I've talked to, have the same effect. But the two people I walk in the room and they totally dominate. I mean, they make everybody look small. First time I met was Bill Clinton was that way. Bill Clinton just owned a room when you walk. I was like, wow, you think he's 6'7" and 280. The next person I saw that was that way was when I met Donald Trump. And I met him with Steve Wynn and other high-ranking people who are big people. They look like midgets. I remember going back and re-Googling. I was like, maybe Trump's 6'6" or something. Maybe Steve Wynn's really 5'5". He looked like Tom Cruise. He looked like a Hollywood actor. I mean, just small, so small in comparison to Trump. Trump was trying to create that psychological visual dynamic on stage. He was trying to make it like in the room. If you had to pick one of these guys to win a bar fight for you, you're always going to pick me, Trump. You may not like the way I do it. You may be annoyed at how I do it. But when you need the bar fight and down deep, that's what you want in the presidency. You don't want some wuss. You don't want. It's like what women tell you. They went, oh, we want the nice guy. We want the sweet guy. Try that. See how long that lasts. That's my take on what I think was happening psychologically. It's a very different take than I focus on totally different things in debates than everybody else does. I don't disagree that Trump created a chaotic scene. I don't disagree that he was being by decency standards extremely mean to Joe Biden. But Biden took the bait. You don't get into a street fight with Donald Trump.
The amazing thing was I didn't post the picture, but I took a screenshot at one point because Joe Biden looked deflated, and he was like looking at Trump when he was talking. It looked deflated. It looked totally crushed and defeated, just in terms of body mannerisms. But you just know that nobody who didn't like Trump was going to like him after this, and nobody who did like him is really going to judge him all that hard for this.
And for folks out there, like if we're in trial, there'll be times where something bad happens. And I've tried to teach other lawyers this. In the Snipes case, I was next to all these lawyers that are way too visual with their responses. Like, oh my God, that evidence is so bad. It's like, you don't have to tell the jury that. You learn certain visual cues so that you know how to dominate a room effectively, and learn certain body language techniques so that when you take a blow, nobody knows you take a blow. Unlike, I'm going to show the Joe Biden tape to future lawyers, say, here's things you don't do. Don't put your head down like this. Don't act sad. Don't act morose. Don't act depressed. Don't act beaten. Don't act like the little kid who was all excited in third grade and his teacher dressed him up, or his mommy dressed him up, and he's going to appear before the class. And then the bully came and beat the crap out of him outside the playground before he got to go in. That's how Joe Biden looked.
You told about keeping that poker face, because I've been there when your witness says something and it's just horrific, and you gotta and the jury, they do like this, they look right at you to see what your reaction is going to be.
That's why you're like, that doesn't mean anything.
And then, just look, you're cool. You're like, what? Come on, this is because that's all they look at. They look at you to see what your reaction is. If you're like, oh my God, we lost the case, Like,
exactly.
yeah.
Done.
Interesting. And actually, is this the good segue into Sullivan, or do we want to take care of New York Times first? Let's take care of New York Times first, because I don't say I feel stupid. I'm just wondering if I'm missing something. The New York Times article on Trump's tax returns, there's the whole question as to whether or not it was illegal to disclose that information via the New York Times. Now, a lot of people in my video breaking it down are saying, well, Viva, you missed it because Pentagon Papers answered this very question, the U.S. versus the New York Times, where the U.S. sued the New York Times to get a restraining order to prohibit the publication of what was classified documentation at the time. Nate, you want to start with?
Yeah, go ahead, Bart.
Sorry, I was going to say one just brief thing on Pentagon Papers that they're misreading. That's a preliminary injunction prior restraint case.
Yeah.
So that's why the issue has never been fully resolved. This goes into the Assange case too, as to can you punish them after they publish? But all the New York Times case established is you cannot have prior restraint on publishing based on the fact that the information was confidential or secret or was otherwise private. They never resolved whether you could be sued for that. They never resolved whether you could be criminally indicted for that. The Julian Assange case will dictate that outcome.
There are a couple of things with the New York Times case. Number one, it's totally unethical for them to publish, someone's tax returns, and obviously it's to hell with that. And they're going to do the public figure thing. So so that was wrong. That was 100% wrong. I don't care what anybody says.
Mm-hmm.
But the second thing is, I think it actually helped Trump in a multitude of different ways. And the first thing, number one, stop listening to the media and start listening to accountants, right? Because right after it came out, I started speaking to accountants, right? I know a guy from Forbes, and I have my own personal CPA. And I said, hey, what do you think about Trump's tax returns? Because I'm waiting to hear so I can do the video. He's going to jail. Oh, my God, this is the bomb. There's Russia. So I'm like, yes, tell me. And the guy said, it's a nothing burger. And I'm like, why is it a nothing burger? So the first thing, one of the big issues that came out of it is that Trump paid more taxes to the government of Turkey than he did to the United States, right? Big story. Oh, my God, he's paid all these taxes to Turkey. But my accountant, the first thing he said was, everybody does that. The reason why is because when you're an American citizen, wherever you make money on the planet, the government taxes. So if you make money in China, Russia, wherever you make money, the government's going to tax. And the only way you don't pay taxes on that money is to claim it. So if you make money in Turkey, like Trump does, Trump has a multinational company, you make money in Turkey, you claim it on your taxes. So you can say, I've already paid tax in Turkey on it, and then you get a tax credit on here. So you'll see with any big multinational company, a lot of times, like Amazon has paid no federal taxes, but they pay taxes every place else. Right. Nobody's making that mention. So the New York Times, what they did, they tried to make Trump's taxes into something that they were not. They tried to make it into this bomb that everyone's been waiting for. And it happened to be a nothing burger. What it did show, though, is Trump's, I can't say Trump, I'll say his accountants are geniuses at exploiting the tax code. And one thing a lot of people aren't going to tell you is that one of the big issues was that Trump got a $72 million refund from the government. And that was actually from Obama. Obama changed the rules in which if you have future earnings, and if you paid, let's say $100 million in taxes last year, but next year you actually lose $200 million on a deal. Well, you can actually get that money back that you paid the government 2 years ago. I forget the name of the term, but it's a way that it works where you can actually get you can take future losses and charge them back to taxes that you already paid to get a rebate. That's all they did. And everybody was doing that because of the financial shutdown. And Obama changed it from 3 years to 5 years. So that 5-year change allowed Trump to go back that extra year where he paid all that money and get that money back. So there was nothing illegal in there. It made Trump look even more, it made him look like a better businessman than I think the New York Times tried to portray. And it's funny because if you guys listen to any competent CPA, they will tell you that those taxes were a nothing burger. And I'm sorry to say to my liberal friends, they just weren't. They weren't. And so everyone out there knows too, just one last piece. Yeah. The reason why they haven't published the source documents for any of those tax returns is because as soon as they publish the source documents, you'll know where they came from. If they came from his accountant, if they came from the bank, they came from the IRS, because they are all on those source documents. So they will not publish those source documents because you'll know their source. So that's the reason why no one can look at the back documents. You can only look at what they wrote up. And they wrote that piece up as a hit piece. That was a hit piece. And accountants, but again, accountants saw right through it. But us people who are just going to read it will not. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
People don't appreciate the basic bottom lines of accounting. It's not even their fault. It's all complicated stuff. So you see, he owes $421 million. He must be in bad shape. If he's got $2 billion worth of assets, you don't want to own $2 billion in assets free and clear. It serves no purpose when you could be reinvesting that money. But so the accounting side aside, I mean, I think most people, if anyone listens to a few accountants analyze that on YouTube, they'll see. But the question from the legal perspective, and going back to U.S. versus New York Times, in that decision, it was a question of prior restraint. But even in that context, that decision, nonetheless, even in that context, left open certain exceptions for the Espionage Act, as far as I understood, and other potential exceptions. So I didn't see it. I still don't see it as being determinate whatsoever on the issue. And I don't know also, it was talking about classified documents, but not specifically in the context of legislation that is passed to prohibit the act. So, I mean, I didn't know if I was missing something or if I wasn't.
Two things there. I don't think Trump could have won a prior restraint suit if he brought it, because since the New York Times case, the Pentagon Papers case, the courts have dramatically expanded prior restraint. This, by the way, is why gag orders are almost always unconstitutional. And courts try to force it on people without it ever being on paper. They scam it 100 different ways. They try to use generic and vague language and all that kind of thing. But prior restraint, for folks that maybe that terminology doesn't necessarily immediately resonate, it means preventing speech from occurring in the first place, as opposed to punishing speech after the fact, whether civilly or criminally. So prior restraint generally is considered almost always unconstitutional when the state does it. So I think that even though you could argue that the special provisions for tax code privacy, which in many respects are even stronger than what's in the Espionage Act because they're very specific, very broad. I mean, they even make it a crime for you to publish information that you receive illicitly if it's tax return information. Because it's, for people's background, the whole scam was this. It was, don't worry that we're ever using your tax returns for any reason other than assessing and collecting tax. And some of us voiced concerns, and people, my predecessors, voiced concerns saying this will just be used as an information gathering technique to have all kinds of intel on people and will be illicitly and impermissibly leaked or given to people or used for improper purposes. So that's where all the Section 6103 and its civil and criminal enforcement provisions in 7213 and other parts of Title 26 come from. It's, hey, don't worry, everybody. If anybody ever does this, we'll punish them harshly. Some of us have been saying I was a bunch of hogwash when it came down to it, but now I have my example. So that's the backdrop of that. I do mostly criminal and civil tax for the last 20 years. They talked to Business Insider about it. They talked to other people that I recommended they talk to, and they came to the same conclusion that Nate said. Everybody who looked at this saw this as a very general. For real estate developers out there, it's sort of like oil depreciation in the 80s and 90s when they were trying to build up the oil economy domestically. They give you tax incentives to do it. And the reason they give you tax, so it would be very rare for a real estate developer the size and scale of Trump to ever pay taxes during most of his business career, federal income taxes. That's going to be the exception, not the norm. And the reason for that is particularly in places like New York, Chicago, LA, California. They've imposed all kinds of restrictions on building. And the only way they could get anyone to actually do development on this is by giving them tax incentives. Trump actually testified on this way back in the 80s before Congress, when in 86 they took out a tax reform bill that basically made that very difficult. He came in and said, look, you've just, because what happens is these are 25-year deals usually with the bank. So they are relying upon the tax credits and the tax deductions to make the deal profitable, which also secures repayment to the bank. So when they went in 86 and made these changes, they jeopardized the entire high-end real estate industry in the United States. So Congress went back and said, okay, sorry, we'll fix this. And they did. So that's where this comes from. This is primarily, Trump gets the benefit from it because he chose to go into real estate development, that in high-end real estate development and in high-regulated states. He profits from this in the tax benefits. But for folks out there, a lot of this real estate development would cease altogether if those tax developments didn't exist. The profit comes from the tax developments, particularly in highly regulated business structures. So, I mean, developers hate building in California, for example,
Oh yeah.
because of the number of restrictions and limitations. People can see George Gammon's video on this too, who's built just basic homes all over the place and all the crazy problems he ran into, and he tried to just build a basic home on a lot in Portland, Oregon. He had to tar and pave the street. I was like, what the heck? So if people like on the left like those regulations, you need to like the tax code provisions, because the only reason why people still do abide by those regulations, which are environmentally sensitive and community oriented and whatnot, is because they have the tax benefits that create the profitability. But Trump it's a very traditional return of a big real estate developer. Trump faces zero criminal exposure because in the criminal tax arena, you have a good faith and reliance defense. So if accountants did your return, tax lawyers did your return, you can't be criminally prosecuted, period. People were comparing this to my Snipes case, saying, well, hey, Snipes had this. There were other issues in the Snipes case. So it wasn't quite.
One thing I've been seeing a lot too on the interwebs is the fact that he got these huge tax credits. Like he's writing off all this stuff, the depreciation, and I think a lot of people just don't understand. Without businesses being able to write off losses, our economy would be destroyed overnight. And the reason why, we'll take a pharmaceutical company, for instance. They put $20 million into developing a new drug. Now, that drug may hit or may not. But just imagine if they had to pay tax on that $20 million loss. They would not be able to create new drugs, right? Because now you're losing money and you're paying tax on lost money. So that's why the government allows you to take this as a deduction. So businesses can take risks, because what we want to do is we want to incentivize the private market, and we want to let people know that it's okay to do risk and that you're not going to be double hit on taxes if you take that risk. And that's the way our economy survives. So the fact that businesses write off things that they use and their losses is something that it's one of the cornerstones to our economy. And I think more people need to understand that, instead of just saying, well, he wrote off all this money. Yeah, but he's got 20 buildings in New York. He's housing millions of, that's the reason why the government allows this thing to happen. Sorry about that.
You're on mute.
Viva, you're mute. You look good talking now.
Yeah. I had to cough and I didn't want to go into the mic. I was going to bring up the pharmaceutical, what's the word? Research and R&D credits. But, and on that vein, just want to make sure everybody appreciates this as well. The U.S. is one of the, I don't know how many countries are out there, but it's one of the countries that taxes you, like you said, Nate, earlier, on your income throughout the world. And so it's not obscene to be paying taxes to a foreign country and then claiming it as a credit when you come back and say, well, I already pay. Happens in Canada as well. Like if you make money in the States, you pay tax on that in the States. You don't want to pay tax on it in Canada again. So it's just people don't even understand that, or they don't even appreciate that factual element. And they say, oh, it's paying money to Turkey. There must be some Russia-Turkey connection. And that's what the New York Times wanted people to take away from that.
And the other thing,
article.
For folks out there, there's two other constitutional constraints on taxation. One is tax treaties. So sometimes you'll see reference to double Dutch, double Irish. This is why I represented one of the high-end tax accountants in the country that help people structure all kinds of things in ways that were completely legal using tax treaties. The tax treaties are things the IRS can't change because, like treaties, are the superior law of the land. That the treaty itself has to change, and so tax treaties have a unique influence on limiting the IRS's ability to even claim some taxes due. And often the tax treaty has provisions that if you pay tax to that country, you can't basically constitutionally have to pay tax here because of the tax treaty between the United States and that country. The second component is the 16th Amendment was interpreted by the Supreme Court as limiting the definition of income to the way they defined the dissenting judge defined it in the 1890s. What that means is you can't tax constitutionally property in America. You could only tax gains severed from the property. And so sometimes net operating losses that Nate was talking about, bad debts, other things, sometimes this is constitutionally required because at some point, if you're taxing people when they're losing money, you're taxing their property. You're not taxing their income under the 16th Amendment's definition by the Supreme Court.
It's amazing. I'm just bringing up some super chats, but someone had said it's time for us to move on to Sullivan if we only have 25, 30 minutes left.
Uh-oh.
So and let's just summarize this. We'll end it with the bookshelf. What are they called? The book ends. the New York Times Pentagon Papers related to prior restraint, which was a prohibition on the publication, and it did not specifically address or even definitively address the consequences of potentially criminal publication. Just said, you can do it. We can't stop you from doing it under certain circumstances without going into the potential sanctions for if you do it and take your chances. So I'm glad I didn't screw that up. I thought I understood. I just didn't want to get into the decision itself in the vlog because I don't think I understand the nuances well enough to do it. That's a good one. Okay, now,
Viva, can you share my screen real quick? That if you look on the bottom, you see the screen. That sums it up.
How did you? It's a very funny thing. Like perfect segue into Sullivan. I was trying to figure out how to live stream and share and screen share during a live stream. So I go to StreamYards, I set up the link, I send it to myself and myself only, and I'm sitting there futzing around for 12 minutes on my computer trying to figure out how to bring up a screen. Fine, done. I thought I figured it out. 20 minutes later, I noticed that I get a YouTube warning and the video has been removed for inappropriate content. And I'm still obsessing about it because I'm not going to relax until they take away that warning because it's bullcrap. The first video that I pulled up just to see if it was working was a Dude Perfect video. And so apparently the warning says that after repeated requests, I did not remove the video from YouTube. I was like, this all happened in 15 minutes. I didn't know there was even a content ID claim on it on an unlisted video that had nobody watching. It was a test. The video is called Test. So long story short, I decided not to air, not to do the live stream reaction to the Sullivan because I didn't want to get into trouble. And then the funny thing is, I noticed a tweet. Someone sent me a tweet yesterday saying, it was a tweet coming from someone. It's in one of my videos. It's in the video from today, saying that apparently Sullivan issued an order that it was prohibited to republish the hearing. And Robert, I sent it to you. I'm going to just get out. Do we like this mode better? Well, I think we like this mode better. What do we think of that? Is that, I mean, I can't even understand that. If you're making something public accessible to the public, then they then cannot republish it afterwards or use sections of it?
The way they interpret this, and all the federal courts do this for the most part, because like every Zoom conference I've had with a federal court, they've told me you can't record, you can't broadcast it separately, you can't rebroadcast it, and that you'd be subject to criminal penalties if you did. I mean, they lecture all of us at the beginning. So the issue is there's a right of public access to the courts, and that right of public access to the courts, I believe they should have been doing this sort of visual, verbal, audio access all the time. They weren't doing that until COVID. Until most of the time in federal courts, state courts have broad access, but federal courts have generally interpreted the right of access to the courts in a more limited way than state courts have. And the net effect of that is the federal court has to allow their physical courtroom to be accessible within certain rules, but they have not. That's why there's almost no cameras in any federal courtroom. Which I disagree with entirely. And they make public access, frankly, very difficult. When public access was anticipated under the Constitution, they thought the whole community could go and watch. There were trials that were done outside, weren't even done inside a physical space, so it had no limits on who could hear and watch and listen. And so I've always disagreed with this restriction, but they hate for anything other than a controlled transcript by the court reporter. And well, I won't get into it, but let's just say sometimes funny things happen with those transcripts. With certain judges, and so I think that. But yes, legally they can do exactly that. That they can make it. Now, what's weird is people were live streaming it at the time, and that's recorded and it's still accessible. So how does that fit into the rule? It's less than clear.
Let me back it up one step, because I imagine there has to be a difference between a Zoom call that is being organized for convenience versus, for example, when the Court of Appeal puts it up on their YouTube page and it remains on the YouTube page.
The Court of Appeals allows oral hearings to be publicly accessible. Trial courts almost never do.
But from what I'm understanding, I have a friend, and this is even from a state court, but they said it's about the money. If people, it's about, they want people to buy the transcripts. Yes.
Tell Nate, tell folks how expensive those can be.
Yes, they can
thousands and thousands of dollars for just one daggum transcript.
So that is a source of revenue for the court. And if people are allowed to just record the whole proceedings, no one goes and gets the transcript. So it's, I understand, but Barnes, Barnes is right about the history, but at the end of the day, it comes down to a dollar figure. If everybody can just record the transcript, then the courts aren't getting those $1,000 fees. That court reporter is not putting it all together and sending it to you a package and forcing you to read it. So it's the court's playing a game, and that's the reason why Viva has that problem.
Okay, so and it was an interesting thing. So the Zoom calls are different than if the court puts it up and leaves it up on their own YouTube channel. There you can pull whatever you want and republish and rebroadcast. This, I guess, was a dial-in, and they had different rules. It's interesting because it was someone just told me who it was. Leslie McAdoo Gordon. I think she was one who posted the tweet about the court order, which I thought was very funny because a lot of people were live streaming it. My argument there would be we're not republishing it. We're just streaming it in real time. But hopefully nobody has to make that argument. Let's get into the actual hearing. It was painful.
Our prediction was wrong. It managed to be longer than the friggin' appeals hearing.
So I think someone told me I might have made a mistake. The 1 hour intro of the facts, was that Sullivan or Gleason?
That was Sullivan, but he was obviously just going to be appealed, right? So so what you do is you make a clean record for appeal. So you just read I've had to sit through this time and time before where they have to read through the whole crap, but that's what he's doing. So he's making a clean record for appeal.
That was a dirty clean record. That was an incomplete clean record as far as I'm concerned. I thought that was Sullivan. I thought that was Gleason making that intro. And I was like, well, this is very interesting, glossing over probably the most important stuff of this. Okay, so that's
funny that you could confuse Gleason and Sullivan as if both were pretending to be judges in the proceeding.
Judges, prosecutors, and it was a joke. I mean, the interplay, what's the word? Like the dialogue between Gleason and Sullivan, it was like, let's see who can kiss up to the other the most and be thankful for it.
One little addendum out there for everybody. You are not supposed to be called a judge when you are no longer on the bench inside a legal proceeding. I'm the kind of contumacious individual who brings this up repeatedly. Mediators, arbitrators love to go by the label judge. And they get mad. I refuse to call them judge because I'm like, that's wrong. That's unethical. That's unprofessional. Judges are supposed to demand that people not do so because the fear is that an ordinary person is confused with who the heck the judge is in the room when two different people are being referred to as judge. And it confers upon them a status that is that's elitist and is completely contrary to our democratic principles. Now, there's not a single ex-judge that appreciates my pointing this out, but it is still true. And it agitated the heck out of me. They referred to him as Judge Gleason.
Nate, what do you think? What was your ultimate takeaway, your sentiment from the hearing?
Oh my God. Well, number one, I love what's her name? Flynn Pretty. Oh yes, she's fantastic. But this judge, he had I think she had some really, really strong points, but at a point, I think she took the bait. Sullivan's bait is, and again, I have no inside knowledge. This is just my opinion. And I hate even giving them all my videos, so that's why I don't give them all my videos. But here's my opinion. Sullivan wants to keep this going past the election, right? He wants to keep this going. And Sydney played right into that, right? I want to make this motion. Okay, let's do it next week. I want to make this motion. Okay, put right it down. I've never seen a judge so happy to see so many motions and to say, no, we're not going to hear. Most of the time, we're not going to hear that crap. He was saying, I want to hear everything. That tells me that's a judge who doesn't want to go to make a decision anytime soon. Just write it down. Give me papers. What about this? Have you talked to the president? Now we got a bar issue. Let's talk to the board. It's like it just went. It seemed like at every point he was stretching this out longer and longer and longer. And now when you got election day less than a month away and Trump out of office, if he loses, and I think they're playing the long game because let's just be honest. You're going into November, right? You got another month before they go back. Then you're going to November, right? You go into November, then you start having, the holidays. Then you start having Christmas. Then nobody's coming back until January 6th. And now you got a new Congress sworn in. Then you got the presidential election, then you got the president being sworn in or a new president being sworn in on January 20th. I think Sullivan is playing the long game, and I think Sidney Powell played into that. She should have tried to close this out today. But I do understand she had some technical legal issues she had to deal with. Number one, she had to deal with the plea, right? And I think it was masterful how she attacked the plea colloquy. Masterful, right? She said it was done incorrectly. She's telling that judge, you did it incorrectly. This is why this plea shouldn't be accepted. Masterful job, but it gave Sullivan what he wanted. Okay, you thought we did it wrong? Let's write it down and put us in motion. And now Judge Gleason is going to get some more money from the federal government. So it was in trying to defend the client. I think she allowed Sullivan to get what he wants, to continue this farce. But now on the points of law, number one, there's rule 12B for the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure about withdrawing a plea. And they specifically talk about withdrawing a plea before a plea's been entered and after a plea's been entered. Right now, at this particular time, we're talking about after a plea has been accepted and entered in the court. That's why Sydney had to fight the plea, whether he actually pleaded guilty through the plea colloquy. She was saying that was wrong because if she can get that removed, then the motion for the 42B, was it 42 or 46?
It was 48.
The 48A motion, that will be. Oh, you keep changing. Gotta keep changing this camera. Well, the reason why that motion and the 48A motion is most powerful during the trial phase. So everyone understands, and I hate teaching law on the fly like this, but trials are usually coming in two phases. You have the guilt phase in a criminal trial, and then you have the sentencing phase. In civil cases, you have the liability phase and you have the damages phase. So in criminal trials, for instance, like propensity evidence and hearsay evidence, they're generally not allowed in the trial phase, but they are allowed in the sentencing phase. In the sentencing phase, you can use propensity evidence and to show that the person's even worse off to get a harsher sentence. So in the trial phase, the 48A motion is a no-brainer because you can't force the government to prosecute, right? But in the sentencing phase, the court now has a role because the prosecutor doesn't even have to show up to the sentencing phase. The judge can just say, okay, you've been convicted, and I'm going to sentencing phase. That's why I think Sidney Powell had three distinct things that she needed to do. She needed to, number one, get the plea thrown out or get the plea set aside. If she can do that, then the Rule 48A motion is good. If she can't do that, that gives Sullivan enough where he can now drag this thing out with this leave of the court, because now you're after your post plea. And that's why Sullivan keeps harping on post plea, because he knows the 48A motion, he has the most authority to deny it only in a sentencing setting, procedural posture, and not a trial procedural posture. I know that was long, but that's kind of the way I saw it.
Well, and I mean, and Robert, you'll field in on get in on this as well. But my understanding is that it doesn't really, it's not really definitive if it's post plea or pre plea, because someone can withdraw their plea after sentencing. So, I mean, do you have anything to add in terms of that? Is like, it's a good argument that maybe there's more discretion, less discretion to refuse the 48A dismissal before plea, but ultimately not much more discretion after plea.
I don't know. I think Judge Sullivan has been using witchcraft to screw with my camera. So but putting that aside, yes, you can withdraw your plea at any time. And the main limitation for Sidney Powell is she's an appellate lawyer. So she was a longtime federal appellate. She worked for the federal government, the prosecutors, the Department of Justice as a federal appellate lawyer, then moved over to the defense side. One of her big clients initially was Enron, people connected to the Enron prosecutions. That's where she exposed a lot of government misconduct and corruption. She's not so much a trial lawyer, and I don't think she has a lot of experience dealing with what I would call a rogue judge. So I think that's what you saw. So she kind of did walk into the trap in the sense of if she was going to move to disqualify, I need to do it earlier. I think she was agitated that she thought, well, Lee Sullivan now has the message. He's going to, get the lesson from the Court of Appeals, which is, hey, do a clean hearing, don't make it long, dismiss the case, show that you really weren't going to do something crazy, and move on. Judge Sullivan is too dumb to get that message. So I've always told people there's two kinds of judges that I have difficulty with, but the third is the worst. I can deal with dumb judges. I can deal with corrupt judges. When you get a dumb, corrupt judge, you're just screwed. because they're not smart enough. You can use their corruption to motivate them to do the right thing, and if you're creative. If they're not real bright, but they're morally driven, you can find a way to appeal to their conscience. When they have neither a high IQ nor a strong conscience, well, good luck with that. And you get results like Sullivan, where he clearly has not got the message from Barr. That's why Barr keeps sending intel and information out and leaking it out. Okay, delay it. I guarantee you Barr's going to use the Flynn case to keep dumping all kinds of negative information that's going to get closer and closer and closer to Obama and Biden's deliberate direct role in all of this. And remember, everybody, Sally Yates is corrupt. She's going to get named in some of this stuff coming out. But Sullivan's not even smart enough to know how to protect some of the institutional people who want him to do what he's doing. Nor is Gleason, frankly. You want to look at corruption? Just look up HSBC, James Comey, Robert Mueller, and Gleason when he was a judge. Just Google that and see what pops up, folks. And now how I would have, if I generally don't say when I like a lawyer how I would handle things differently because they know things about the case file I obviously don't know. What I can say is that in general on the fly, I would have been more aggressive. But if I was going to file motions, I would have filed them before now. I wouldn't have asked for them afterwards. And I would have used the word corruption over and over and over again. And I would have used it for the Obama administration. I would have tied it in. And I would have tied it into, I would have used the phrase judicial corruption. So when he asked that rhetorical question, didn't your client plead twice? It would have been an excellent opportunity. Yes, due to the gaslighting by judicial corruption, government corruption, and other corruption, including high-ranking members of the Obama administration, including by the District of Columbia with the first judge assigned, having a special relationship with Peter Strzok. Start to contaminate the file in such a way that Sullivan realizes, I keep going down this path, the people I'm trying to protect are going to get burned, and burned. But I thought the whole proceeding made Sullivan look bad in the end. I think it was designed to justify his position. I think it undermined it with most fair-minded people. Enraged, of course, the Flynn support, and it really didn't empower the critics. And you know that because they didn't jump on what was said at the hearing, other than Sidney Powell talked to Trump about a pardon. Big deal. Yeah,
that's the only thing that was remotely sensational that came out of it. It was sort of a bombshell as a fizzle bombshell. Two things actually. One, I brought it up earlier, but the idea of pardoning commuting, everybody says Sullivan wants to drag this on. One way or another, Trump can pardon Sullivan tomorrow if he wants. He can pardon him anytime up to leaving office. So the idea would be not that they want to drag this on into the new administration because presumably it'll never get there
before leaving office. You mean?
But Sullivan wants to drag it on to force Trump to pardon, which would be the idea. What do we think? I'm trying to make sense of it. What do we think of Sidney Powell saying that she told Trump not to pardon Sullivan? Flynn, sorry.
See, if I had been in Sidney's position, I would have been more blunt and personal. I'd have said, Your Honor, I told him there was no need to pardon him, even though he's expressed public concern at the outrageous conduct that took place here, because I had mistaken confidence that Your Honor would actually do something about all this corruption. I mean, I would have been blunt and personal. It would have been, let's go at it, and I'm going to make you bleed as much as you try to make me bleed. But even judges that aren't the brightest bulbs in the block usually get the message and try to transition into some. He would have just said, okay, I'm done with you, Sidney. Mr. Judge, ex-judge, please tell us again, grandstand some more, and tell me how great I am before you build a statute right here in court for me.
But that's one. Don't forget, though. Sidney Powell is not a trial attorney. She's an appellate attorney. And when you're a trial attorney, you have to know when your judge is pushing you and when to push back. But appellate attorneys are only used to taking that flack from judges. You got a panel of 6 judges and they just throw flack and you just got to take it. And and she was trying to push back, but it was that you can tell she was trying to treat it as an appellate judge. So it was tough. And that's why it went on for so long. But I do want to correct the record on one thing, because as a prosecutor, you're right. A defendant can withdraw a plea almost at any time, but the rules here in New York, and even in the rules of criminal procedure in the federal circuit, there is a point where you can't withdraw your plea unless I forgot the rules for 11 in a rule. Yeah, in rule 11, it says you can if before the court accepts the plea, you can withdraw your plea for any reason.
Yes.
Judge Sullivan keeps saying, but it says if the court accepts the plea, and that's what the colloquy happens, and that's what she was attacking the colloquy. If the court accepts the plea, then the court can, right? And this is before the court imposes sentence, but the court has accepted the plea. The court can it has this test. It's called the fair and just reason test, and there's a test that the court can go through. I think Flynn can pass that test because the test is there going to be any harm to the government's case, so forth, so forth, so forth. Yep. But I think Sullivan understands that right now, if she was to go and ask for this plea to be withdrawn, which she's been doing, and she's doing it in 3 different ways. She's saying that the plea was accepted incorrectly, that it was accepted under false pretenses, and that the government itself case can't be harmed because the government's saying there is no case, right? So I think every which way this plea should be withdrawn. But I think Sullivan is playing the political game of let's just draw it out. You want to make another motion? Okay, yeah, write that up. Send it back to me in 2 weeks, and then I got to have Sullivan respond to that in 2 weeks, and now we're in another month in. So I think that is the game that Sullivan is playing, and I think it's dramatic. It's horrible for Flynn, but that's the game he's playing. It's obvious. I think. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Viva.
And it makes a joke out of the Court of Appeals. The Court of Appeals pretended that he was just going to have a normal hearing and everything was going to be fine, and he was going to dismiss. Now they've been exposed for the frauds that they are. Because it was clear from the record that Sullivan had this intention of delay, of dragging this thing out, and they pretended it was otherwise. And honestly, this Sullivan's actions, if he keeps on this path, the chief judge of the D.C. Circuit can kiss his Supreme Court ambitions goodbye, because he gambled heavily that Sullivan would get the message. And Sullivan clearly did not get the message, and now it makes his ruling look bad in retrospect, because they're going to have to shut this door down the road, because other political rogue judges are going to play the same game in a political case when the politics is on the other side of the equation.
This was not a test of the seriousness or a superficial analysis to ensure that the justification was there. This was, and like Nate is saying, hey, yeah, we'll look into the authenticity of this document another week. Make the motion to disqualify me another. I waited 6 months. Once I made the motion to disqualify, it took 2 months to get the hearing, 6 months to get the judgment, and it was not granted. It was all wasted time. There was one thing I want to say. Sorry, another thing that I couldn't believe was when Sullivan purported. And I'm getting Sullivan and Flynn mixed up, so my apologies if I do it again. Sullivan purported not to know why Contreras recused himself from the file. I mean, and I said on the
that was so strange.
It was strange because it made it talk about gaslighting. I felt crazy. I was like, did not Sidney Powell actually talk about this in one of the briefs? I mean, there's been
she wrote it in a brief, yeah, about how he was in the struck text messages and he had posted, yeah, like how could he not know that?
I genuinely felt crazy. Like, am I hallucinating? Did I have some sort of cognitive hallucination?
But to be fair, Viva, most judges don't read the briefs, and it's really their court attorneys. So
then let's go to the analogy of a hollow barrel making more noise than an empty barrel, because that's a pretty silly thing to say. I mean, one of the crux issues was that the plea before Contreras itself was invalid because he was conflicted, and therefore any plea in front of him was invalid. It's right. It was a mind-blowing thing to say with so many people watching. But that was it. I had another thought, but I lost it. Robert, what were you going to say?
Oh, yeah. I mean, just going back to Nate's thing on the natural instinct for a lawyer that hasn't dealt with a lot of rogue judges at the trial court level is to say, move to disqualify, because you're just so mad and you're agitated and you're irritated. That's just a trap. That just gives the judge a chance to delay proceedings. It gives him a chance to talk great about himself. I've never gone that path. Now, in some states, you have an automatic right of disqualification. You can exercise it at certain times, et cetera. But outside of that context, I always go to what's going to expose and embarrass this judge, and hit, and do it in nice diplomatic language. You don't have to be mean or nasty about it. You can just hit it at that language. And that's the path to take. But it's just something that she's unfamiliar with. And I think she's also shocked and frustrated that this keeps going, gets dragged out in a way that what she is as an appellate lawyer, you look at all the past history and she's like, this has never happened before. And so I've been involved in a lot of cases where things have never happened before. So I'm accustomed to it and react to it, but it's not unusual for her to do what she did.
Is she a criminal lawyer? Because only reason why I'm asking is because the part with the piece that always upsets me when Sullivan says, well, he's pleaded guilty and it's perjury. And I'm like, she should automatically jump on it. She's like, the federal rules of criminal procedure says you can withdraw your guilty plea. It doesn't mention that you'll be held for perjury. It says you can do it, and it gives specific examples of when and how you can do it. So yeah, you can withdraw your plea. You're a judge. How can you not know this? Let's just look at the you know what I mean? It's like him asking that question would just, it seems like she just wasn't prepared to say, yes, you can. The federal rules of criminal procedure allows you to do it. Yes.
Now, I mean, one caveat on the recusal thing, if I'm ever before Judge Sullivan in the future, I probably will move to disqualify by just pointing out how stupid I've referred to him over time and afraid based on that fact. But
people should appreciate that it is the judge, him or herself, that decides on the recusal, Robert. So he might take great pleasure in making you go to the appeal so he can petition for rehearing, but not be a party to the suit because they decided it was a sua sponte rehearing.
That was garbage. But that was, sometimes even though it's garbage, you have to appreciate the beauty of how they manipulated the law.
It was skill.
Because that was beautiful. It was beautiful.
Yeah, that's why your most dangerous judge is a smart, corrupt judge who's out to get you. Those judges know how to screw you with style and fashion, and man, getting around them is tough.
I know, because I mentioned it in the video today, but the Court of Appeals has basically gifted this suit back to Sullivan and basically protected him from any recusal obligation. But the way they did that to avoid the question of whether or not he became a party to the suit, during the hearing, they said, well, Sullivan petitioned for rehearing, but we at some point decided to hear the sua sponte on our own motion. Thus, we no longer need to address the question of whether or not Sullivan made himself a party to the suit. Some people call it magic legalese. I call it the stuff that turns your stomach as an attorney, and it's so frustrating you never want to see or hear about it again. In your car. Zui Hu says, opinions on amicus getting the final say. Also, can Sullivan deny 48A based on Powell's letter to POTUS? So I don't think I don't think they can deny the 48A based on the letter to POTUS at all. I think that's
and by the way, that was Sullivan's habit. For all those people out there that tell me judges never watch what's out in public arena, Sullivan has disproven that. Sullivan's habit of citing things that are not part of the record, or that things that have not been properly admitted from non-parties, like Peter Strzok's lawyer just writing a letter.
That's insane.
Completely insane. You're not supposed to be doing it. And and so that by itself was problematic. If I was going to come up with a new recusal argument, it would be something like that. A judge, I'm worried you're contaminated by things that aren't supposed to be part of the record. You know the rules of evidence. Suddenly you're reviewing things you're not supposed to. You're citing things you're not supposed to. And I would have also used the hearing as an opportunity to reverse the separation of powers question. Make the judicial branch start to face the questions they want to demand to invade the executive branch. I would be like, Judge, I want to know who you've talked to. Have you talked to anyone connected to the Obama administration? Have you had any dinners about this? What research have you done? Because you're citing research that's not part of the file. I want to have
a newspaper.
Let's take a look at your internet record. Let's take a look at that. I'm going to need a subpoena that, Judge, because after all, we don't have separation of powers anymore, right? You get to inquire into the executive branch. You get to inquire my conversations with the president. I want to inquire into you. You have to reverse that, and you have to just it's the old Sun Tzu principle: to defeat what is strong, attack what is weak. And that's the way to go at those cases. And I think that's what might have been more effective. But it is what it is. It's making a sideshow that's embarrassing, I think, for the judicial system. And it is what I like about it. To all my conservative friends, it's educating them on what I've been trying to preach that only mostly my liberal friends have been aware of for the past 20 years, which is there's systemic problems in the way prosecutors act, the way judges act, that often corrupt. This is how people are easily coerced. Like when people are saying, oh, he pled twice, he admitted it twice. It was like, one, there's a legal argument about whether, in fact, he pled under the rules. But putting that aside, I said people admit to crimes they didn't commit all the time. Number one most unreliable form of evidence is eyewitness testimony. Number two is confessions. Watch the great movie Under Suspicion. It took a little while to reference.
No, it happened to me as a prosecutor. It was like my third case. A guy coughed it all up. He admitted it, and next thing you know, you get a tape, and it wasn't even there. I'm like, why would you plead? Because he's like, because I was just so scared. Because you go into one of those meetings. And you say, I got this. You're going to jail, or you can take a plea. He's like, all right, I'll take a plea. He's like, you just look so serious. I was like, but if you didn't do it, why?
It's very common. If people watch the film Under Suspicion, you have Morgan Freeman cross-examining Gene Hackman. And Morgan Freeman is he's not like a corrupt guy that's trying to induce a fake or false or coerce a confession. He really believes it. And that's the most dangerous form of confession, where the cop really believes that the person is confessing truthfully. And it's because there's all kinds of ways to get false confessions for a wide range of reasons. And that's I brought up with all these people. Was like, hold on a second. A lot of you that are harassing me on Twitter, you're fans of the Central Park Five getting to walk. All of them confessed. Okay, yeah, it wasn't in the plea context. It was in a different confession context. Some would argue that's even worse because it's more detailed, more factual, more spontaneous. But we recognize all the time that confessions and admissions are never a final arbiter of truth. If they were, tons of innocent people would be in prison to this day.
Robert, you mentioned it. I mean, I'm just answering somebody's super chat here. Put the comment in. But if the charges are dismissed without prejudice, then Trump partisan, would it be workable? It would be workable, but it would be a political victory for Sullivan. I think that's. If I had to change my prediction, I'd say that's where it's going to go, because they certainly spent a lot of time talking about the with prejudice dismissal versus without.
One caveat to all this: if he actually denies the Rule 48 motion, the Court of Appeals is going to reverse him, because they're going to be very agitated that he didn't get the message, and they'll probably slap him publicly in a way that everyone else gets the message, because they don't want to see this repeated.
But one thing I do want to say is the ethics issue from Sidney Powell, and I do want to be fair for on both sides, in the sense of, as a prosecutor, and well, for myself as a former prosecutor, if the defense counsel goes to my boss and tells me to be removed and doesn't have a good faith basis for that, I just don't like this guy and he should be removed, that is a little iffy. But I think Sidney Powell, instead of attacking it with, I do have a good faith basis. They haven't turned over Brady evidence. And the fact that they didn't turn over Brady evidence is the reason why I'm asking for their removal. I think that's the way you go to, so you don't have the ethical issue of, why are you going to the prosecutor's boss to get him removed without any type of without some type of probable cause. But that there is an issue. And I think she has to address it, because, again, you can't just go to the prosecutor's boss, because that's putting undue pressure on them. And you do have to have a good faith basis to it. Now, do I think she does have a good faith basis? Yeah, if you're hiding Brady evidence, you're not turning over stuff, then you can go and ask for that. But I think that's what Sullivan is getting to. Well, you went to their boss. What was your good faith basis? And then you went to their boss's boss, the president, and had conversations. So now, no matter what people think about it, but I think that's the ethical piece that Sullivan was alluding to. That's why he went through that chain. Well, when you sent this letter to the AG and when you talk to the president, because he's making the ethical issue about the inline prosecutors who were there, that she was trying to get them removed without a good faith basis.
Yeah, the thing on that is that technically legally you're entitled to do that. So people lobby higher ups all the time in the Justice Department. It happens frequently in cases. So there was one implication where he was suggesting that because she hadn't appeared in court that she couldn't represent him. That's hogwash. That frequently you represent someone before you appear in court. That's part one, and then part two is, I get him trying to make the implication. I get prosecutors don't like it. But I know a lot of high-ranking defense lawyers that use that tactic on a common continuous basis. So it's not, put it this way, within the defense bar, it's not considered unethical. It's not a violation of any professional rules. It might be a discourteous, so that the prosecutor is going to remember you and dislike you and be upset about it and so forth. And I've never used that path. I tell the prosecutor up front, what I think, and if I'm going to go up their higher ups, I tell them in advance I'm going to their higher ups. That sort of indoor political lobbying rarely works. I think that's where I would have been focused. I would have attacked Sullivan right away, attacked the court right away. As soon as he asked that question, I'd have said, look, no, I talked to the president. He was going to pardon him. He'd made public statements about it. My client wanted to be vindicated in the court of law, and I was incredibly naive about how much Your Honor is committed to that. I apologize. That's the point I would have made. Totally agree. He'll have to defend himself. But usually they're not ready for it, because I've dealt with a lot of these judges that are used to bullying people in the courtroom, and you fire back and they don't know what to do. The real crazy ones, it's kind of like Sullivan, they've threatened, of course, to throw me in jail. So there's that experience. I was just going to say, Robert, if Sidney Powell had taken that line with him, I have no doubt there would have been a threat of contempt of court, especially knowing. That's beautiful. Be on the phone. Be like, you have to send those marshals. It's going to take a little while. Is there something that can be done about judges like Sullivan? I mean, we've discussed this before, but really the only sanction is impeachment. Politically,
Yeah,
politically, you
yeah.
can impeach them, but they only impeach judges they dislike, that disserve the institutional sources of power. It's rare that someone gets impeached for anything, and for truly egregious conduct, like getting caught bribes, etc.
Well,
It's
don't
very hard
forget the
to
first
impeach a federal judge.
But wasn't the first federal judge from the Supreme Court? They tried to impeach that person for having bad rulings or whatever, and it
Back
didn't
in the
work
day,
out.
I mean, when
So,
it
yeah.
started out, it was all out political war. But they basically dropped that. Well, one, they dropped it really after that case because it lost in the Senate, and there was a lot of complaints about the misuse and abuse of impeachment in the Senate by some of the better legal scholars, in my view. That's why I cited all those in the Trump argument as to where I thought impeachment should stay limited. I know it can get broad, but it's a bad idea when it gets broad. And the Samuel Chase impeachment from the 1800s is the failure of that, and the way the scholastic legal opinion reacted to it is the reason why we didn't abuse that power down the road. Now, my own view is, there's a current debate about who should govern the ethics of courts. Justice Breyer wants to keep it within the federal court system. My view is it makes no sense to have judges write their own rules, judge their own rules, and enforce their own rules. The whole point of tripartite branches of government and Montesquieu's checks and balances is gone when that happens, especially when you compound that with the people most likely to know about judicial corruption, lawyers, are also being regulated by the very judges who would control whether your accusation of corruption could take away your own law license if you do so. So I have a problem with that. The executive branch should be in charge of monitoring judges' ethical compliance in terms of enforcement. The legislative branch should write the rules, and then the judges can adjudicate the application of it, whether it was fair, as long as they're neutral judges at the end of the process. But it's deeply problematic to let judges be the sole arbiter of what the rules are, who enforces the rules, and how to judge them.
But then how do you get over the Marbury versus Madison issue? Because no matter what it says on paper, the judges are going to be the one to interpret it.
I've never agreed with Marbury versus Madison.
I know you don't. That's why I brought it up.
Robert, you mentioned something earlier about Sullivan appealing to documentation information not in the file specifically with the Trump situation, but I didn't make a big deal of it in my analysis today because I don't want to go a little overboard. What about this Peter Strzok letter from his attorney coming in the night before this hearing saying that some annotations on some of the documentation were altered and that it wasn't Strzok's handwriting, and the judge considering this and referring to it in the context of a hearing where it hadn't been admitted as evidence, the authenticity of it had not. I mean, it just absolutely it was mind-boggling. I mean, it's just mind-boggling.
By a non-party. Not only that, the guy that was acquitted on the FARA-related charges by the judge after the trial that related to Flynn, his lawyer has tried to send stuff into Flynn, and the judge has either ignored it or struck it from the record. So it's just a joke what he's been doing. You're not supposed to have. There's reasons why we have rules of evidence. There's reasons why there's proceedings in place, and Sullivan just ignores it whenever it suits his purposes.
Because
hold on. Can I ask you guys? Isn't that classic hearsay? An out of court statement. But it's like how and he's referring to it.
Not even supposed to have legal access to put in things into the record in the first place.
Yeah. So when I heard him say it, I was like, hold on. He's literally bringing in some unknown out of court statement and offering it for the truth, right? Yes. It says it's got. I'm like, how is this not hearsay? This is textbook hearsay.
Forget even hearsay. What about potential contempt charges if Strzok is lying yet again and saying, "Oh, well, now it's out in the news that Strzok says it was altered." He's not under penalty of contempt or perjury.
He's
for
not
having
even a party to the case.
That's why you have the hearsay rule. That's why the hearsay rule exists. That is exactly the reason.
Cross-examination. He's not a party to the case. So there's rules about what can be put into the judicial record, and there's rules about what can be admitted into evidence. And Sullivan routinely and flagrantly violated them when it served his purpose.
He even quoted a newspaper artical.
No, it's
good.
Yes.
It's madness where he was in front of the Court of Appeal saying, I just have questions to ask. I'm not going to go into this. He was talking about documents received the night before from a non-party and talking about it as though it was a matter of fact and not probably the most suspicious statement from someone whose credibility has been impugned, to say the least. I didn't think I understood it because it was so outlandish and so out in left field.
No, you are right. It's classic hearsay. It's an out of court statement offered for the truth of the matter asserted. The reason why that was being offered to show that those statements were altered, and that's what it was. at that point, I think Sullivan is just, it makes Sullivan seem too angry to just, in other words, he's just looking for every angle to get Flynn. And I think at a point you have to kind of stop and say, what am I doing here? I'm quoting the New York Post, and I'm quoting some guy who just sent me something the night before, and I'm questioning the attorney about it. Like, this is fact. He says they were like, really? I'd be like, you're really giving me an out of court statement? You know, it's crazy. And then how can you object to the judge? Like, judge, objection, hearsay. Who's offering the hearsay? You're offering the hearsay.
And if Sidney Powell does that, it's like, okay, well, let's bring in Strzok as an attorney. We'll schedule a hearing where we
Oh my God.
I mean, now this one just caught me off guard, this super chat. City of Champions, appeals court in Pennsylvania sided with wolf restrictions. Thoughts?
The question is whether there's a bunch of state court cases. So is that separate? Is that all the other state court cases, or is that the Third Circuit Federal Court of Appeals? They wouldn't have made a final decision yet. They might have issued a stay. But the decision for the federal court out of the Western District of Pennsylvania, I didn't think they had even set it for a hearing yet. The Third Circuit Court of Appeals.
I don't think so either, because I would have heard. I think someone would have gone.
There's tons of cases in Pennsylvania, folks. There's a big, huge takings class action in Pennsylvania. There's tons of. I follow all this for obvious reasons. So they could be referring to a different case. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court has generally sided with the lockdowns. So so it wouldn't surprise me if a Pennsylvania Court of Appeals that's on the state side has done so.
Did the district court rule on state law, or did it rule on federal law? Because I was assuming they would rule on federal law, right? Yeah.
All right, now I hear the pitter patter of time up upstairs. I just want to get to 2 or 3 super chats that I think I missed, that I know I missed. Terry Ebert Mendoza says, "Viva Barnes, playing devil's advocate, and we love them for it. Thank you, Nate." Oh, so that was just a thank you. Thank you very much, Terry. There was one more that I missed. Oh, this is going back to the Hunter Biden. When did it become okay to tell the president, shut up, and call him a clown? Biden was angry. Trump was angry. Worst of all, Mike Wallace was angry and feeding Biden what to say.
Well, that's why you don't get into a gutter fight with Trump. You don't get into a street fight with Trump. Biden needed to come across as, hey, I'm presidential. I'm cool as a cucumber under pressure. Stress doesn't affect me. And I can just handle this guy like he's nobody. Like the way Obama would have. Obama would have just been dismissive and chill, and you did that Jay-Z thing. They would have been that kind of thing. That's what I think. If I was advising Biden, that would have been my focal point. I think they came in prepped, thinking Trump was going to be like he was with Hillary, where he avoided interrupting, and he behaved differently with Hillary than he had in the Republican debates, because there was gender issues, and Trump needed to look more normal. In this debate for Biden, Trump was always going to treat Biden like he treated Jeb Bush. And so what Biden needed to do is you need to prepare him for all of his triggers, to just block out those triggers. I think he came in with a bunch of little prepared scripts, and their focus was, we don't want him to have a dementia moment, a senior moment. And so he was focused on that. That's where people are speculating he had an earpiece because of certain techniques he was using. Those same techniques would often be something you would train someone if they have a memory gap or a stress-induced event, to try to not allow those things to happen. You stare into space and look at something. You stare at a white, the legal pad. You pretend you're reading something. You do those. You shut your eyes to sort of block it out. It's a blocking technique. But they didn't prepare him for. At least it looked to me. Maybe he couldn't be prepared. They didn't prepare him psychologically for how his behavior, physical. I would have spent all of my time, 80% of my time, not worrying about substantive answers. He's done platitudes for 30 years. He knows how to repeat those in his sleep. I would have focused on body language. Communicate cool, calm, collected, unaffected, nice, decent. And whatever you do, whenever you think about using an adjective towards Trump, don't. Because then you're at his level. Then it comes out what the headline did: chaotic debate, name calling debate, disaster debate. That he needed to not be that way. He needed, in order to say, hey, I'm more presidential than this guy. Don't say that verbally. Behave in physical behavior. Do so. Don't call him a clown. Don't call him a racist. Don't call him a liar. Don't tell him to hey, shut up, man. Because all of that makes you look like him on his level. Now he's going to win that battle, because if it's a street fight, they pick Trump. You want to be, no, I'm a Marcus of Queensborough man, and just act decent and act respectable and act civil and act like none of this is affecting you at all. You're just on your script and he doesn't exist. And if I was advising Biden, that's what I would have advised. He failed that test by my barometer. At least when I watched the mute, I was like, man, this guy fell apart bad.
But Robert, like one thing that Biden can't do is answer questions, right? Because he eventually, when you get to the end of the question, you could just say, "Well, did you get it? Did you get that?" Because he goes on rambling. You don't know what the hell he's saying.
Yes.
But I also think though, Trump kept saving him in the middle of his ramblings. Like there was one answer he started going off on some tangent, and Trump interrupted, and that's when Chris Wallace got involved and stuff like that. So I think if Trump is going to learn anything to learn from this last debate, is number one, let Biden talk, right? Because it only can go downhill from there. Let him talk. And
Right,
then second,
go ahead. Sir.
go ahead. No, and second, I think Trump. We all know Trump wants to be that. He smelled the blood. He was a shark. He smelled the blood. The blood was there, but he just didn't know how to attack it in that type of environment. And Chris Wallace didn't help him out by any means, right? It was almost a 2-on-1 debate if you watch it. But I think Trump smelt blood. And the problem with this debate is that I don't think anybody, you can take a bet. 99% of the people didn't think Biden had a chance to win this debate, right? This was the fear for Biden. And to come out even, I don't see how anyone can realistically say Biden lost this debate, because he didn't have to win. He just had to come out even. And I think that's why they were celebrating at the end of this. He was just like, hey, a draw is a win for Biden. A draw is a loss for Trump. But I think next debate, I think Trump is going to hopefully he'll figure it out and say, okay, let me just let him talk and then respond to what he's saying, because what he's saying is just garbage, and I can just beat him on that instead of trying to cut him off every 5 seconds.
My takeaway is different. It's because it's all about the body language component. So I think Trump's goal was he didn't care about Biden rambling. He wanted Biden to communicate non-verbally stress, lack of strength, and those two traits, and not a good liar. Now, I think the third party might not have been that conscious. Trump would call that good salesman, bad salesman. That would be Trump's language. That Biden came across bad salesman, weak, he doesn't handle stress well, doesn't handle conflict well. He reacts with clear, nonverbal cues of stress. And now Trump probably will reverse course in the second debate. He tends to do that. He tends to bounce around his strategies. But I think his objective was different. Also, I think Trump went in with a different premise. Trump went in with a premise that as long as he prevented Biden from hitting a home run of looking presidential, particularly non-verbally, that's where he wanted to be in. So now that comes from different premises. The people who think he's down 6-7 points think he needed to hit big. I can see where their reaction is. Trump's operating under an entirely different premise. And whether it's accurate or not, we'll find out in time.
All right. Now, Isaac Castillo, I can't find the super chat, but he said, what was the most impactful moment of the debate in your humble opinions? I have two for me. Obviously, the moment with the question that Trump didn't answer properly. And my other one was when Biden said, "You are the worst president we've ever had." It was something like that. And it sent like an insult out of a rom-com where like, "You're the worst dad I've ever had." And it was so childish and juvenile. Even in the context of that childish and juvenile debate, it was just it was the most infantile insult if you're going to give an insult. And I just thought it was those were the two memories I have from the debate. Nate, what will linger in your memory from the debate?
See, Barnes keeps talking about this stupid body language thing, and it's got me thinking now body language. But I think everybody watches these things differently. For me, when Biden said, my son, he was addicted to cocaine and he's overcome it, I'm proud of him. That just personally connected with me because, I just have so many family members who have struggled and who have overcome it. And I didn't see a presidential candidate fighting at that point. I just saw a man, saying, yes, I've had this problem and my son's overcome it. And I'm proud of him. And for me, that just touched me differently because of my past experiences. And then but on the Trump side, I thought what made him look, Trump had a lot of great one-liners against Biden, which made him seem funny. But at the end of the day, I think when I saw the performance, I think Trump came out as the alpha male, the guy who I want in a bar fight to be on my side, Trump. And I thought Biden was just holding on to not lose. That's what I came out of the debate with. But I think, that dynamic it doesn't play well to everybody. But at the end of the day, I think Barnes is right. If you just look at body language and you look at the outcome of the debate, if you're going to war with somebody, I'm not choosing Biden. I'm going to choose Trump. but we're not, but I don't think not everybody's voting for somebody who's going to war with. A lot of people are voting for somebody who they can attach with. So both sides, that's kind of how I kind of saw it on both sides.
All right, and Robert, ending it with you.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, it's the body language is the biggest takeaway for me. If Trump wins the election, I think there will be a reinterpretation of this debate in the months to go afterwards, because there'll be a lot of curiosity about whether this chaos strategy that was employed deliberately, accidentally, whether that there was something else afoot in that debate than the transcript would reveal. I think it's a totally different debate between reading the transcript and watching it. So I think the transcript debate would seem confusing, and Biden did just fine, and maybe outdid Trump at certain points. I think from a visual standpoint, if I'm right about this and it shows up ultimately in an election result, then this will be the most significant body language debate indicator of any presidential debate I've ever seen.
Amazing. And Leon Parkhill, good point. I've done more in 47 months than you've done in 47.
That was great. That was fantastic.
Gentlemen, let's wrap it up now. This was phenomenal. I mean, it's great. We have over 8,000 people watching in a midweek stream. We'll see how often we can do this, but this was a big week that we had to cover a series of big events. Robert, we're still going live Sunday, so everyone don't panic. We're going to do that as well. We'll get into some of the questions I think people were asking. There's Breonna Taylor update and Project Veritas, which I think we'll have to touch on or discuss in detail Sunday. Robert, Nate, thank you very much for coming. Everybody, thank you for tuning in. Sorry if I missed the super chats. I know I did, but thank you all for the support and thank you all for coming. Okay, that is it. You guys say goodbye and then I'm going to end broadcast.
Adios and adieu.
All right, everyone. Have a good week.